51st, that's not a typo. When a street interviewer asked Americans to guess where the UK would rank if it were just another US state, measured by GDP per capita, the best guess on camera was 40th. That was, in the interviewer's words, a reasonable guess. The real answer, 51st, dead last. Below every single state in the Union, Mississippi included.
GDP per capita would be 51st. 51st.
Oh, the worst.
Yeah, the
Absolute
worst. Even lower than Mississippi. What do you think of that?
One guy on the street standing in London just laughed when he heard it. That's surprising, he said. Even of the poorest state, it's even poorer. Then he did what most of us would do. He tried to explain it away. We're here in London, so I think it's probably a little misrepresentative of the UK as a whole, he said, reasoning that London skews rich and makes the comparison unfair. It's a fair instinct. London is the wealthiest pocket of the country by a wide margin, and using it as a proxy for the whole nation would be sloppy. Except the number isn't about London, it's a national average. Zoom out to every town, every region, every postcode in Britain, and the figure still holds. The United Kingdom, as a whole country, produces less economic output per person than America's poorest state. Not one of the poorer states. The poorest, the one that shows up in every list of things Americans joke about. That's the headline stat, and on its own, it's almost too clean. The kind of thing that sounds made up until you actually sit with it. So let's not just repeat it and move on. Let's actually take it apart. Because the interesting part isn't the number itself. It's the machinery underneath it. 3 separate, testable, structural reasons why one economy keeps generating more wealth per person than the other, year after year, regardless of who's in government. Reason 1, America lets you fail, so it lets you try.
Because one of the reasons is their approach to employment regulations. So it's like, we can preach that this employment rights bill is going to make everything better for everyone and it's going to improve rights, but the reality is it's going to result in a lot less job creation, a lot less wage growth, right, and a lot less economic opportunity. Is completely the opposite of the direction that we want to be going in if we want to be creating wealth. The American dream.
Start with the labor market, because this is the one that sounds the most counterintuitive at first. A financial commentator filmed on the street lays out the paradox directly. You can pass an employment rights bill, and on paper it looks like a pure win. It's going to make everything better for everyone. It's going to improve rights. Nobody votes against protecting workers. It sounds humane. It sounds like the obviously correct policy. But here's the mechanism he points to, and it's worth sitting with rather than skimming past. The reality, he argues, is a lot less job creation, a lot less wage growth, and a lot less economic opportunity. The opposite of what the policy promised. Why would stronger protections produce a weaker labor market? Because hiring and firing aren't two separate decisions. They're the same decision, just facing in opposite directions. When it becomes expensive, slow, or legally risky to let someone go, employers don't respond by becoming braver about hiring. They respond by becoming more cautious about it. A company that knows a bad hire will cost them 6 months of legal exposure and severance doesn't take a chance on the promising but unproven candidate. They wait. They lean on contractors instead of full-time staff because contractors can be released without the same friction. They offshore the role instead of building a team locally. The safety net, in other words, doesn't just protect the person already inside it. It can quietly wall off everyone still trying to get in.
Wealth. The American dream, when you go out there, it's just very alive and kicking. It's not political. It's completely apolitical. It's embraced by absolutely everyone. Doesn't matter what your role is in society, whether you're an entrepreneur yourself or whether you work for a business. Everyone has the mentality that they are an entrepreneur. They treat themselves like a business. They have their own business plan of where they want to go in life, and it's so clear. Whereas I think if you come over here and you go around Westminster or Whitehall, it's like, who's talking?
Compare that to what the same commentator describes as the default American mindset, and the contrast is almost jarring. Everyone has the mentality that they are an entrepreneur, he says. They treat themselves like a business. Crucially, he's not talking about founders, startups, or people with LLCs. He means everyone. The person waiting tables, the person driving for a delivery app, the person working a desk job with no plans to ever start a company. It's a mentality, not a job title. Each person in this telling has their own business plan of where they want to go in life, and it's treated as completely normal to talk about that plan out loud.
Around Westminster or Whitehall, it's like, who's talking about the British dream? Like, Is there even a British dream? I don't know what the British dream is anymore. That hasn't always been the case.
Then he turns the lens on his own country, and it's not flattering. Whereas if you come over here and you go around Westminster or Whitehall, he says, it's like, who's talking about the British dream? Is there even a British dream? I don't know what the British dream is anymore. That's not a throwaway line. It's a fairly damning admission from someone embedded in that world, and it lands harder because it's not partisan. He's careful to note that governments of all stripes and colours have drifted the same direction, some more pro-business than others, but none making growth the obvious, unmissable priority the way American local and state governments treat it. Now, to be fair to the other side of this, and it deserves more than a token sentence, looser labour law isn't a free lunch. It comes with a real human cost. Weaker job protections mean weaker job security. They mean it's genuinely easier to lose your income with less warning and less recourse. A worker in a country with strong dismissal protections can plan their life around a level of stability that an at-will American employee simply doesn't have. That's not a small trade-off. It's the difference between building a 5-year plan with confidence and building one with a permanent asterisk next to it. The UK system exists because someone decided that stability for existing workers was worth prioritising over speed for the system as a whole. That's a legitimate value judgment, not an error. But the data on aggregate outcomes doesn't leave a lot of room for ambiguity. Looser hiring and firing rules correlate again and again, with more job creation, more wage growth, and more overall economic dynamism. Not because employers in flexible labour countries are kinder or smarter, because the system removes the penalty for taking a chance on someone, and taking chances multiplied across millions of hiring decisions a year is what growth actually looks like in practice. Reason 2. Two very different relationships with money.
This is an astronomical difference, with only around 8% of people within the UK owning a stock, and within America it's around 62% of people. An entire 54% difference.
If the labour market explains where the opportunities come from, the second gap explains what happens once people actually have money in hand. And this is where the difference between the two countries stops being subtle and starts being almost civilizational. In the UK, roughly 8% of people own stock. In the US, it's 62%. Read that gap again slowly, because it's easy to skim past a percentage difference without registering how enormous it actually is. That's not a gap. That's a 54-point canyon separating two entire national relationships with money. Brits, on the whole, park their savings in cash accounts and government bonds, instruments that feel safe precisely because they don't move, and that quietly lose value to inflation year after year while feeling like they're doing nothing wrong. Americans, on the whole, put money into equities and treat the volatility that comes with it, including real, painful losses, as simply part of the deal.
In America, people seem to be a lot more financially educated and switched on, whereas talking about money and investments in the UK is kind of taboo. So from a young age, their parents are probably talking about investing and different investments they've made and the stock market and all these different things, and in the UK you'll just never hear that. And I think when people in the UK hear people talking about stocks and investments and things like that, they kind of see it as braggy or something to look down on.
Why the difference? One creator, breaking this down for a UK audience, points to something less about policy and more about culture. In Britain, he says, talking about money is kind of taboo. Bring up your portfolio at a dinner party and you're not seen as informed, you're seen as showing off. Worse, he argues there's a strong mentality in the UK to hate the rich, even while many of the same people complaining about their own finances aren't doing the one thing that would most reliably change their trajectory: investing early and often. In the US, the exact same conversation is unremarkable. Parents discuss their portfolios with their kids the way they discuss a school project. Co-workers compare notes on retirement accounts the way Brits might compare notes on a football match. It's not that Americans are smarter about money. It's that the entire culture treats financial participation as normal, expected, even a little bit fun, while British culture treats it as either boring, risky, or slightly distasteful.
Owning a home is seen as the most important financial milestone. Property makes up 40% of UK household wealth, whereas in the US, that's closer to 20%. However, even if your home rises...
Property tells a related story from a completely different angle, and it's one of the more counterintuitive parts of this whole comparison. 40% of UK household wealth sits in property. In the US, that figure is closer to 20%. On the surface, that sounds like Britain is doing something right. home ownership as a stable, tangible store of value, the classic marker of financial maturity. But a house is a strange kind of asset. It doesn't pay you a dividend. It doesn't compound the way a diversified equity portfolio does. Its value is theoretical right up until the moment you sell it. And even then, you still need somewhere to live, which usually means buying or renting something else at the same inflated market price. A country whose wealth is disproportionately locked into property is, in a very real sense, a country whose wealth is disproportionately illiquid. It looks good on paper. It doesn't put much extra cash in anyone's pocket month to month. And then there's the tax math.
Contrary to popular belief, the US social security system is also more generous than the UK state pension. Income tax is much lower in the US. Its top rate band kicks in at just over $600,000. Compare that to £125,000 in the UK. Then there's inheritance tax, which is only charged on estates over 15 million in the US, compared to £500,000 in the UK. Check out my tax,
which rarely gets discussed in these comparisons, but arguably matters just as much as either of the points above. The top income tax band in the US doesn't kick in until roughly $600,000 a year. In the UK, it kicks in at £125,000, a threshold that in London especially isn't even a particularly extraordinary salary anymore. Inheritance tax follows a similar pattern. It only applies to estates over 15 million in the US compared to £500,000 in the UK, a figure that a modest London house alone can exceed. None of this creates wealth on its own. Tax policy doesn't build companies or invent products, but it does determine how much of what you build you actually get to keep and how much gets passed on rather than clawed back. And on both of those measures, the American system leaves considerably more in people's hands. It's also worth asking why the participation gap exists in the first place, rather than just accepting it as a cultural quirk with no history behind it. Financial caution of this depth doesn't usually appear out of nowhere. It tends to be inherited, the way a family passes down habits without ever explicitly teaching them. A generation that watched pension values swing hard during past market shocks, or watched relatives get burned by products they didn't fully understand, doesn't need a lecture on risk to become risk-averse. The caution gets absorbed quietly at the dinner table without anyone ever framing it as a financial lesson. Whatever the exact origin, the effect compounds in a very literal sense. Money sitting in a savings account earning less than inflation isn't neutral. It's shrinking in real terms every single year, just slowly enough that it doesn't feel like a loss until you actually do the math. Contrast that with a system where the default assumption runs the opposite direction, where staying in cash long-term is treated as the risky decision, and staying out of the market is what needs justifying, not the other way around. That's
At number one, you got the size of the economy. The US economy is simply much bigger than the UK, and there's more money, more companies, and more competition for talent, which means companies are willing to pay more to attract the best people. And number two, you got the cost of living, especially health.
Single flip in default assumption, repeated across tens of millions of households for decades, is arguably a bigger driver of the wealth gap than any single tax policy or regulation. Culture, in this case, isn't a soft or secondary factor. It's doing a huge share of the actual economic work. Reason 3, the paycheck gap is real, but it's not the whole story. This is the part of the conversation where it would be easy to just declare America the winner and move on. And it's exactly the part where doing that would be intellectually lazy. US salaries genuinely are higher than UK salaries for equivalent roles, often by a wide margin, and that fact alone drives a huge amount of the wealth gap discussed so far. But a UK financial educator, an accountant by training, breaks the why into 5 real distinct factors, and most of them have nothing to do with Americans simply working harder or being smarter. First, the US economy is simply bigger, with more companies competing for the same pool of talent, which mechanically pushes wages up through competition. Second, the cost base is higher, healthcare chief among it. Third, US companies, especially in tech, tend to generate larger profits and reinvest more of that directly into salaries, bonuses, and stock options, whereas UK companies tend to be more conservative with pay even when profits are healthy. Fourth, there's a genuine risk versus stability trade-off built into the two labor markets. And fifth, a stronger dollar in global trade gives American companies more room to pay competitively on the world stage.
You can get free healthcare through the NHS, but wait times can be very long for both appointments and emergency care. In the US, there's no free public healthcare. The average family pays around $27,000 a year just on health insurance. Oh yes, and I forgot to mention, in the UK you can get up to 28 weeks sick pay per year. Well, in the US there's no national law for sick pay, so if you fall sick then you're just not gonna get paid. In terms of education, state schools are free.
The healthcare number deserves to be sat with rather than rushed past, because it's the single biggest asterisk on the entire America is richer argument. The average American family pays around $27,000 a year just on health insurance, a bill that exists whether or not anyone in the family gets sick, and that can balloon dramatically the moment someone actually does. On top of that, there's no national law guaranteeing sick pay in the US at all. Miss work because you're ill, and depending on your employer, you may simply not get paid. The average Brit, by contrast, gets healthcare free at the point of use through the NHS and can access up to 28 weeks of sick pay in a year without needing to negotiate for it individually. Education tells a similar story. UK university tuition is capped at $9,790 a year. In the US, public university tuition averages around $11,950 a year, and private university tuition can run as high as $45,000 a year, nearly 5 times the UK figure, for a degree that isn't automatically 5 times more valuable.
I personally think it's time that we see pay increases across different industries in the UK, because our costs have gone up significantly, but the salaries have barely moved over the past few decades, which is why most millennials can't even dream of owning their own homes. What do you think?
So the comparison isn't clean, and it would be dishonest to pretend otherwise. As the same educator puts it, higher American pay often comes with higher costs, higher pressure, and higher risk, while the UK tends to offer more stability and balance. That's not a minor caveat tacked onto the end of the argument. It's a legitimate structural point in Britain's favour, and it's the reason a straight salary comparison between the two countries will always overstate the
Not with housing. In the UK, the average house price is around £268,000, but that varies a lot depending on the area and the size of the house. The average rent per month is £1,374, but if you're in London, it's more than double than that, so it's around £2,100 a month. In the US, the average house price is around $415,000, and the average rent is about $1,600. And in New York, the rent is $3,500 a month. So on housing, it's actually pretty similar, but I think both countries have the same problem.
Real gap in living standards. A nurse in California may out-earn a nurse in Manchester on paper, but if the American nurse is also carrying a chunk of that salary toward insurance premiums, student loan payments, and a lack of guaranteed sick leave, the gap on the ground is narrower than the gap on the payslip. So why does America still come out ahead? Here's where it gets genuinely interesting, because even after you account honestly for all of that, the insurance premiums, the tuition, the lack of guaranteed leave, the math still tilts toward the US, just by a smaller margin than the headline salary numbers suggest. Start with housing, since it's often assumed to be the deciding factor and turns out not to be. The average UK house price sits around £268,000 and the average US house price around $415,000. Different currencies, different markets, but roughly comparable in terms of what a typical family is taking on relative to typical income. Average rent tells a similar story. $1,374 a month in the UK versus $1,600 in the US, both of which more than double in their respective capital cities. London rent regularly clears £2,100 and New York rent regularly clears $3,500. Housing, in other words, is not where the two countries meaningfully diverge. It's expensive everywhere, and neither system has solved it. It's specifically healthcare and education where the UK pulls ahead on cost, and specifically income and investment culture where the US pulls ahead on wealth building. When you add those two forces together over an entire working life, not 1 year, not one paycheck, but 3 or 4 decades of compounding, the American advantage doesn't just persist, it widens. A slightly higher after-tax income invested at a slightly higher participation rate in an asset class that actually compounds for 30 years doesn't produce a slightly bigger number at the end. It produces a fundamentally different retirement, a fundamentally different safety cushion, a fundamentally different answer to the question of what happens if something goes wrong.
The UK economy had zero growth in July, zero. And for those that don't understand, July is probably the best month for businesses across the UK. Take it from a man that ran one for 6 years and was involved with one for over 20. May, June, July, August in the UK, that is where you make your money. That is where you bring it in. Spending is on the up. People are out and about with their families, spending. People don't go out as much in the winter. They work harder. They stack the cash. They do it for summer so they can have a good life with their family, with their children, with their friends, with whoever. So it should be very telling and very alarming to everybody that July, one of the most important months for our economy, in my opinion, had 0% growth. 0%, and it doesn't mean zero.
And then there's the growth question, which is really a question about direction rather than a snapshot. The UK economy posted 0% growth in July. A month that, according to someone who ran a UK business for 6 years and was involved in one for over 20, is historically one of the strongest months of the year for British commerce. Spending is typically up. Families are out. People who worked hard through the winter are finally spending what they saved. A flat month during that specific window, he argues, isn't a neutral data point. It's a warning dressed up as a non-event. Because if growth can't happen in the 1 month practically engineered for it, the underlying trend is very likely worse than the headline number admits.
Bloke, let me know in the comments, do you think the economy will bounce back and start seeing gains again? Or do you think this is just an inevitable crash that is soon to come? Because personally, my opinion is that we are going to crash. And it's very telling that during summer, it flatlined. I think the winter will be a little...
To his credit, he doesn't pretend to have a monopoly on the truth here. He's upfront that this is his opinion, delivered as a 27-year-old bloke rather than an economist with a title, and his prediction that this flatline is the start of a genuine downturn rather than a temporary blip is a real live debate rather than a settled fact. Reasonable people, including plenty in his own comment section, disagree. It's entirely possible the UK sees a bounce back in the following quarters. But even as an open question, it's a telling one. Nobody in this conversation is predicting the US is about to stall in the same way. The honest verdict: none of this adds up to America good, Britain bad. And it would be a disservice to the actual numbers to pretend it does. Britain wins clearly and unambiguously on healthcare access, on guaranteed sick pay, and on the cost of higher education. Those aren't small sentimental advantages. They're the difference between a medical emergency being a health event and a medical emergency being a financial catastrophe. They're the difference between a bad flu costing you a paycheck and costing you nothing. They're real, structural protections that the American system simply doesn't offer as a baseline, and anyone comparing the two countries honestly has to give the UK full credit for building them. But on the specific, narrower question that started this whole conversation, who is generating more wealth per person? Who is investing more of what they earn? Who is keeping more of what they build after tax? The numbers keep pointing in the same direction, and they've been pointing that way for long enough that it's stopped looking like a coincidence. It's not because Americans work harder or are smarter or want it more. It's because one system is calibrated to reward the attempt, to let people take a chance on a hire, a stock, a business idea, while the other is calibrated to protect against the failure. Both are legitimate values. Only one of them, on the current evidence, produces the number that started this whole thing. A country whose poorest state still outproduces an entire G7 economy per person year after year. What makes that especially uncomfortable for Britain isn't that the gap exists. Gaps between countries always exist, and nobody expects every economy to move at the same speed. What makes it uncomfortable is the direction of travel. A flat July, a stock ownership rate stuck in single digits, a wealth base still disproportionately parked in property rather than productive assets. None of these are one-off events. They're the visible symptoms of a set of choices made consistently over years by millions of individual households and by the policies shaping the incentives around them. Choices are reversible in a way that geography or history aren't. A country doesn't need a different population, a different climate, or a different starting point to close a gap like this. It needs a different set of defaults around hiring, around investing, around what gets celebrated versus what gets quietly discouraged at the dinner table. That's a genuinely solvable problem. Whether it gets solved is a separate question entirely, and one this comment section clearly has opinions about. What do you think? Is the UK's safety net worth the wealth gap it seems to produce? Or is it time Britain looked harder at what's actually working across the Atlantic? Drop it in the comments. I read everyone.